but to be I don't get it.
So let's see. I'm done with this.
Let me know video share करके आप.
Yeah,
अच्छा,
we are
okay,
live.
got it. Bro, hang हो गया था दिख रहा है. Let me know.
It might have some, what do you call, latency.
Yeah, there's a bit of lag.
Yeah, there'll be a 1 minute lag.
Okay. और ये ऑटो रोटेट क्यों हो गया वीडियो?
क्या हुआ?
वीडियो रोटेट हो गया.
What? 1 second.
मेरा
It's
लेफ्ट राइट टू लेफ्ट हो गया.
Yeah, it's working fine for me as a user. I'll share the link with everyone.
Just send me a screenshot once. Okay, so we'll start exactly at 7:05. Then we'll wait for people to join. Okay, so we'll start exactly at 7:05. Then we'll wait for people to join. Okay, so we'll start exactly at 7:05. Then we'll wait for people to join. Okay, so we'll start exactly at 7:05. Then we'll wait for people to join. Okay, so we'll start exactly at 7:05. Okay, so I think we have 16 people watching now, so we'll get started. So, firstly, welcome back to Scholarship Academy. I hope yesterday's session was a great one that was led by Habib, and I hope all of you have a good idea about what exactly are we giving you, how are we going to guide you, and the topics and the timetable that we are going to talk about. Yeah. So coming to the today's session. So firstly, there's no language barrier in my session. So if you are comfortable asking questions in Hindi, then you can go about asking questions in Hindi, and let's make it more interactive. So if you have any queries, please post in the chat box, and Mas, I'll also be addressing your question in the future. Yeah. Coming to introduction, so most of you might not be knowing me. So for who you do not know me, I am Saad Subhan, and I'm MTCT. I had just passed out, and I am currently working as a support analyst, associate support analyst in ServiceNow. But this is not entirely about my journey. So my journey had started around last year, July 13th to June 26th. That's when I gave my interviews for ServiceNow. So ServiceNow being a huge company, it was a great pressure on me that will I be able to crack it? Will I not be able to crack it? And considering the fact that they are the highest paid company in our college, so there was a huge pressure. Initially, ServiceNow had come, I had visited first our college in the month of March. So I couldn't to make through that round. I got eliminated in the first round itself. Why? Because I was not prepared enough for that round. Luckily, what happened was they again decided to come back in June to recruit a few more members. So this is when I started preparing for ServiceNow. That is when I had realized that I am going to join this company. I'll work hard for it and I'll make sure. So they had come for two roles. One was the business analyst role and other was the software developer role. So since I had a lesser experience about the software side, about the coding side, so I decided to explore the business analyst role. Now all of you might be coming from an IT background or non-IT background. So however you are coming from, so you might be knowing that software industry is only about coding, coding, coding. But no, that's not the thing. Software industry is not only about coding. There are various sectors in software industry that we can explore. For example, there's business analyst, there's the support side, there's the coding side, there's the testing side. There are different. Yeah. So there are different sides to it. So I decided that I'll be exploring the business analyst side. Now coming to the interviews. So for the software recruitment interviews, you'll have one technical round that is similar for the business analyst as well. You'll be having a technical written round where you'll be asked MCQs based on various different. Works, but just to give you a brief overview of how exactly a business analyst performs. So when we are creating a project, the main requirement is to create stories. Now, what are stories based on? Stories are based on the requirements that we get from the product analyst. So when we are creating a project, the main requirement is to create stories. Now, what are stories based on? Stories are based on the requirements that we get from the product. Is my voice clear now? Let me just check. Yeah. Yeah. So now, yeah. So now let's talk about the interview process. So I was giving you an overview of how business analyst works. Yeah. So while getting the requirements from a product manager about what product we are building, so our important the business analyst's role will be to collect the requirements and create a stories. Now, for example, if I am a product owner, I can just give you a generalized view. Like for example, I want a website to be built, and that website should be divided into different modules. Now, being a business analyst, what your role would be to discreetly know about exactly what the website is consisting about, what are the different modules, and then analyze the website and then start making stories about it. For example, as a front end user, I want the website to be I want the website to be having different buying modules, selling modules, and different cards. So these are the different things that you'll be required to collect. And then there'll also be a few meetings that you'll be responsible for holding, which I'll talk about later in the meeting. So this is it. Now, once I had been interning in ServiceNow as a business analyst for around 9 months. Post which I got converted into a full time employment, but for the role of associate support analyst. Now, meanwhile, there was another company that visited our college, that is Deloitte. You might have given Deloitte interviews as well recently, and a few of them also made it to Deloitte as well. Yeah. So coming to the Deloitte interview experience, the Deloitte interview experience was completely different from what I experienced in ServiceNow. Why? Because in Deloitte's interview, I was applying for a position of technical analyst. Now, in the position of technical analyst, the initial round was an aptitude round. For most of the companies, you'll be having an aptitude round that you'll have to clear it in order to make it to the personal interviews. Now, in personal interviews, mostly you'll have technical rounds. It will be either one or two, and followed by the HR round. Now, in Deloitte's interview round, personal and technical interview round one, I was pretty scared as I did not have much knowledge about coding. Like I had brief knowledge about coding, but then I was worried about the fact that will I be able to make it or not. So then I step into the interview, and that is when basically interviews are just whatever you know, you just have to put it in the right words. Like for example, you might when you're trying to speak, a lot of thoughts run through your head, and then after the entire thing happens, then you realize that you could have spoken better. So interviews are nothing but when you're trying to convey your thoughts, just convey it very clearly. Okay, coming to the Deloitte interview, in the technical interview, I was initially asked about why am I applying for this position, and then which language would I prefer. So I had chosen the fact that I am comfortable with C++, and then he also asked my point of interest. Now, people to look cool, they try telling about different types of fields. For example, they have no idea about artificial intelligence, but just to sound normal, cool, they start mentioning about machine learning, artificial intelligence, and but when the interviewer starts asking us questions based on that, that is when we realize that we have got no idea about it. So I chose my field of comfort, that was web development, and then he asked me a few questions about HTML, CSS, and whatever were related to web development. He asked a few questions to me about it, and then followed by he asked me about my experience, so I started giving my experience in internship. Now if you are doing an internship, that is a very good thing, and it is an added advantage for you in any interview, because you have to mention it in your interview that you are currently working as an intern, and you have to share your experience, so that the interviewer gets to know that you are already well equipped with the organizational rules, you are well equipped with what are the terminologies that take place in organization, and that is how it will help them. Yeah. And then there were a few. He asked me about what exactly is my role and why did I choose business analyst and why did I not. It is not necessary or mandatory that you have to find the right solution, or you have to find a efficient solution. It is just that you need to find a solution, and they're just checking your capability to think. How would you think out of the box? So that's it from the HR round, and they'll ask you questions. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the mainstream HR questions, and probably they will also expect you to know a lot about the company's background. For example, if you're applying for Deloitte, you need to know about what Deloitte has been, how many years Deloitte has been into the market, whether it is a service-based company, whether it is a product-based company. These are different types of information that you must keep in mind. And coming to Mars, your question was related to how about the preparation strategy. Yeah. So the best thing to start right now would be two things. One is you start competitive programming. So there are various different platforms that are present on internet for competitive programming. For example, there is HackerEarth, there is HackerRank, there is Lead Code. So these are different platforms on which you can start practicing competitive coding, because competitive coding is very important to clear the written technical round and also the technical interview one. So get started with competitive coding and reach different levels, and that is going to help you a lot. And the next important thing that would be projects. So at the end of the session, I would also be addressing about what projects you need to make and how important a project plays during the interview process, the entire interview process. In case any one of you finds that I am speaking quite a bit fast, so please do mention it in the chat box so that I can just slow down a bit, because I won't be realizing it. Yeah, so just put it down in the comment box so that I can just slow down a bit and help you understand well. Yeah, so this is it, and now I'm after the internship had ended, so I'm now working as an associate support analyst. Now, coming to my role, what exactly would a support analyst do? Would be your questions to me. So I'll give you a brief overview about how a support analyst works. So basically, whenever you create a product, so there are different stages of product. So once a product is deployed, once it is in the market, that is, it is there for the customers to use. So there's also going to be a lot of defects that are going to rise. There also be a lot of bugs. There are going to be inquiries. There are different types of things that take place. So a support analyst, yeah. So websites for competitive coding mass would be there's HackerRank, there's HackerEarth, there's LeetCode. These are the websites that you can refer for that you can start competitive coding on. Yeah, and then moving on to the support, yeah, like I had addressed about the support analyst role. So basically, so resolving the inquiries, resolving the defects, making sure that the entire process is working properly. There's no breakdown in the codes. So that will be the entire role of a support analyst. Okay, so now moving on to the topics that I'll be covering today. So these are the most out of the four topics. The most important topics in any interview would be software engineering and database management system. The next two operating systems and computer networks are equally important, but they would be more majorly asked in your written tests. Because and sometimes in rare cases they will be asked in your interviews as well. So most important are the software engineering and DBMS. So moving on to the first topic, so first subject, that is software engineering. We might all have had a subject called software engineering in our probably in your third year or in your 3-2 or 3-1. So software engineering basically we just thought it is a theory subject. अरे लाइट लेके पढ़ लेंगे theory है हो जाता marks मिल जाते. The we did not realize that, and our lecturers also might have told you that it is a theory subject and how important it is. So similarly, I am also emphasizing on the fact that software engineering is very important. Why? Because the entire organization, how it functions, right from the requirement gathering to the entire deployment of the product, it is entirely based on software engineering. Now, you just know you might be very good at coding, you might be very good at anything, but if you do not know the entire process, how the entire software development works, then that is a drawback in your case. So that is the reason why software engineering plays a very important role. Coming to the first topic, that is the software development life cycle. Now, most of us might know about this, but most of us might not be aware about what exactly is a software development life cycle. What we all, most of us might only know that software banana hai, to coding karna hai, that's it, coding, and then it's ready there for the market to use. But that's not how it takes place. The first and the most important step would be the requirement analysis. So first, you're required to gather the requirements, what you're looking for in your project. For example, suppose I have a product manager and they are asking me to make a website. So now my from my side, I should be clear with what exactly they are looking for in the website. Whether it is an e-commerce website, whether it is any different types of website, whether it is an educational website. So those are the different requirements that I'll be taking place. Now, most of the interview questions that will be based on SDLC won't be like they'll ask you to draw software development lifecycle, or they'll ask you to mention them. Most of the interview questions that will be based on SDLC would be, for example, they'll ask you to list out the different steps. Now, listing out becomes very important because you are required to know what are the steps. Because if you do not know what are the steps that take place to the endpoint, then they will start thinking about you that you do not have much idea about the software. So then you are supposed to list down the requirement analysis, defining, designing, coding, testing, and deployment, and finally the maintenance. Now coming to the second question, so they might ask you a tricky question regarding the fact that which amongst the entire process, entire SDLC lifecycle would be the most important one. Now coming now, if I were to answer this question initially, when I were if I was in your place, I would be like coding is very important. Coding is the heart of the entire software, and without coding the software cannot take place, anything like that. But the answer to this question would be every step in this life cycle is very important. Why? Because I'll tell you, now you know how to code. You know around 3-4 languages, you know C++, you know Java, you know C, you can code literally anything. But if I just go and tell you that I want a website, would you be able to code? No, you would not have much idea about it. You would just be able to code the random things. But would you be able to help me? Would you be able to make me happy with the fact that this is the project that I am looking for? No. The first thing will be you have to gather the requirements. The second thing will be you have to define what exactly they are looking for. And next, the next that follows up is the designing part. So you need to have a design before you can actually code. For if you do not have a design about the number of modules you have, the number of the language that you're trying to choose, the MERN stack, the mean stack, if you do not have any idea about what design you're going to do, then you might not be having a good code. For then comes the coding. Coding is obviously a important step, and once you code, then after you code, it is not necessary that the entire code is to be deployed directly. There are a lot of bugs you might not be aware of, so that is when testing comes into place. So testing is also very important. This is another position in a company, that is a software tester. Then comes the deployment. Finally, that is pushed into the market, and once it is pushed into the market, that doesn't mean अरे हो गया project अब मैं सुकून से बैठ जाता हूँ. It's not that case. You constantly have to keep maintaining the project because there are a lot of inquiries that will be coming to you. There'll be defects, there'll be bugs, and you might also see in your application, in your phone, mobile phones as well. There are constant bug fixes. So this is how the entire software development lifecycle takes place. Now moving on to the next one. So there are different types of waterfall. There are different types of models. Waterfall model, agile model. Now waterfall model, most of you might be thinking, अरे एक mini project में बस एक photo लेके लगा दिए. That is the entire thing about waterfall model. It is not going to be important. But it is very important because you need to know the difference between waterfall and agile in order to understand why we use agile. Now coming to the waterfall model. So waterfall model is a traditional model. That is, it was used previously. Now how exactly do we go through in a waterfall model? First we collect the requirements, then we design, code, test and implement. But what is the most important thing about waterfall is that once you have decided that these are the requirements, you have designed it, you have coded, now you cannot go back to the initial steps. That is one of the most important drawback of waterfall. Similarly, when you come to agile, in agile, what happens is first we collect the requirements, then we create a plan about how are we going to go about our code, how are we going to go about the different types of stories that we have created, and then we are going to have a proper design as to how the code will be implemented, how different types of things will be implemented, and finally the development phase takes place and releases takes place. But it is important to note that in this agile development we are deploying a code in phases. For example, consider a website. So we have an e-commerce website. Now we have different modules. We have the cart, we have a trending list, we have a men women section. Now consider we have a shopping website, men's women's section. So now we break it down into phases. We do not plan on releasing the website entirely in one session. We'll break it down into four phases. First phase will be the we'll roll out the men's section, we'll roll out the women's section, then we'll roll out the buying cart, then we'll roll out the payment section. So that is how the entire thing works. Now these sections will be mostly of 1 or 2 weeks. Now these 1 or 2 week section are called as sprints. In agile model, these are called as sprints. So basically, this entire project is divided into sprints. Whereas in waterfall model, what we do is we work for around. Let me just check. Yeah, once I'll just check once. Is it clear now? Okay, yeah, yeah. So I was talking about the waterfall and agile model. So yeah, so most of the organizations nowadays use agile model. Why? Because agile model is pretty flexible for them, and it also helps them to realize. ServiceNow also uses agile model. Why? Because we constantly keep having different types of requirements from the product managers, and we constantly have to keep taking the requirements from the manager and keep adding them into our projects as well. So that is the reason why we follow agile model, and I am sure most of the organizations do follow the agile model as well. And now coming towards the next important step of the software development lifecycle is testing. Now we know the importance of coding, that it is very important to code in efficient way, and time complexity, space complexity while addressing entire things. Now while you are coding, it might so happen that you are bound to miss some conditions. You might not be able to test all the boundary conditions. So that is when testing becomes very important, and it is always important for any one of us to test our code before deploying it. So now the questions that would be based on different types of testing would not be like list out the different types of testing. There, for example, there could be questions
That they would be asking regarding testing, like suppose if now I have to test a feature of my software to check whether it functions properly or not, which type of testing would you choose? So now for this type of question, you are supposed to give an answer that I would choose functional testing, considering the fact that it has different types of tests like unit testing, system testing, regression testing, and further other testings. So functional testing would help me understand the entire capability of my function, whether my function is living up to the expectations. And as a developer, the first thing that you do after creating a code would be giving your function and giving your the code and input and checking whether the output would be right or not. This type of testing is called as unit testing. And unit testing is something that is not usually done by the software testers exclusively, but the software developers are also required to perform unit testing in general, because they are the ones who are creating the code. They are the ones they're supposed to first test their code before moving it into the testing instance. Yeah. So now moving to the next one. So the next question would be, now if you're required to check the performance analysis of your code, if your performance, whether it is meeting the requirements or not, whether it is performing well or not, whether it is living up to the expectations or not. Now, in this case, which type of testing would you perform? So in that case, the type of testing that you would be performing would be the non-functional testing, because this is not based on functions. That is the reason why, as the name suggests, it is a non-functional testing. In this, you'll go to the documentation testing. So now it is very important that whatever you are doing must be documented always. Because for the front end users, it is firstly, because if someone comes up to you with a question like about how this functions, you, instead of wasting time on explaining it to them, you can directly show them this documentation that this is how this particular feature works. That becomes very easy. So that is when documentation comes in place, that they have to test whether the documentation that you have made is matching with the product that you have made or not. That is the entire thing about documentation testing. And then comes the performance testing. In performance testing also, there are different types of testing. For example, load testing in case of websites. Now if you are whether a large number of users logging into the website, whether your website is able to manage it or not. So these are the different types of tests that you would perform in case of software testing, in case of the performance testings. And then the security testing. Obviously, while you're creating a software for a company, there are also chances that the hackers might be there. So it is very important that whatever your code is, it is not easily hackable by the people who are trying to hack it. So these are the different types of non-functional testing and the functional testing. And for this exclusively, there's also a role that is called as software testing. So associate software tester. So the while developer is required to develop the code, similarly tester is required to test whether the code lives up to the expectations, whether the code is able to match the entire flow. And now I'll tell you how regression testing comes into play. Now, in the case of agile model, like I told you, that we build in phases. Now, phase one, we have built it, we have tested it, and now we have deployed it. So that is completely done. Now, in phase two, we come up with a new set of requirements completely. Now, when we are coming up with a new set of requirements, so we test those set of requirements. Now, when we integrate the phase one and phase two, it is very important to check now after integration whether the entire product is working fine or not. Whether it is working fine or not. So that is when this comes into place, that regression testing is very important. After every phase, the entire product right from the start to the end is being tested. So this is regarding the software engineering. So these are the key or important topics that are required to be covered in software engineering. For example, the SDLC model, the Waterfall Agile model, and then why is Agile better than Waterfall, and software testing techniques. Now coming to the Scrum ceremonies. So for people, Scrum is nothing about Scrum. For people who have dived deep into Agile, must be knowing about Scrum ceremony. But people who do not know, these are certain amount of meetings or certain amount of steps that take place in an organization while developing a project. So what are the different Scrum Scrum ceremonies? Now, coming for, I'll address to you this as how these are generally conducted by the business analyst. This is the role of the business analyst to conduct Scrum ceremonies. Now, what exactly are Scrum ceremonies? For example, now you have stories. You have created the stories, you have understood the requirement. Now what is your job? Your job would be to explain it to the developers about what exactly is the requirement. Your job is to explain it to them what the product manager is looking for. So this is done in the story planning session. This is the first scrum ceremony that takes place in a sprint, in one sprint. That is a story planning session wherein you explain the developers that these are the stories, these are the requirements, this is how you have to go about it, and this is the timeline, this is the deadline, and we have to meet certain timelines, and this is how you have to code. And they'll explain everything to the developers, and in case developers have any questions, they can ask the person who is holding the scrum headmaster, who will be conducting the sprint planning session. So they can address those questions, and then moving on to the next one. So the next one will be the after the once there'll be a daily sprint sessions. Now, daily sprint sessions are just short 15 minutes or 5-minute sessions, depending upon who your scrum master is. What they want to know is whether the project, what progress have you made in today's day. For example, they'll ask you, what have you done yesterday? What are you planning to do today? And if there are any restrictions that you have, or if you're facing any blockers in general. So that is what is daily sprint planning sessions. So these are daily sessions throughout the sprint that will be conducted for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending upon the availability of the team. And finally, once the entire code is done, after the sprint, there will be a sprint retrospective session that will be conducted at the end of the sprint in order to know how the sprint was. So this is basically for understanding whether the team is comfortable with the amount of load that is being offered to them, with the amount of stories that is being given to them, or are they overloaded with too many stories, or are they comfortable with too many? Are they comfortable with getting more stories? So basically, they're just getting a review about how the entire sprint has been in the retrospective session. These are the 3 important Scrum ceremonies that take place in any of the organizations that will be working in future. So this is regarding the software testing. Now, coming to Zeba's question, like when is the best or efficient time to start preparing for placements? I would recommend that there's no as such a better time to start preparing. But if you are in second year or third year already, you should start preparing for placements. I'll tell you why. Because competitive coding is in general a very lengthy process, and it is not something that you can just mug up in one day and next day you can go and write it out like other theory subjects. It is not that easy. Competitive coding requires constant practice, and constant practice requires time. So just plan it out. For example, if you are in third year, now daily you can try taking out 1 or 2 hours for competitive coding, and then you can be like, today my goal would be to solve 5 questions a day. Now, when you start solving 5 questions a day, initially those 5 questions will take you around probably 3 or 4 hours. After probably a month, those next 5 questions, same question will take you around only 1 hour. So that is how you'll be getting perfect at it. So if you go on practicing, then you'll be improving your coding skills. So that is the reason why it is better that you start as soon as possible and go through with the competitive coding. Meanwhile, along with the competitive coding, you can also start building your personal projects, because projects are going to add a great importance to your resume. It will add a great weight to your resume. So the more projects and the better projects that are related to your field, if you start making, that will be good. And by the time you reach third year, there'll also be internships, and you'll get busy with the major projects and all. So you won't be getting much time to practice competitive coding. And then we have another question from Mars, like, is only one language specialty enough? So I would say that just have a strong grip on one language. It is not necessary that you have to know 4 languages to clear the interviews. What interviewers mainly are looking for is whether your basics are strong or not. They're not going to ask you questions from C++, Java, Python mixed. They're going to ask you which language are you comfortable in. So if you are comfortable with C++, then dive into C++, get a strong grip of C++, practice coding in C++, practice competitive coding, make projects, get a strong grip over C++, because that is what the interviewers are looking for. They'll check whether your basics are strong in the programming language that you're comfortable with, and if your basics, because they do not want to look much into the advanced concepts. They just want to know whether you have the right knowledge regarding with respect to the language that you chose, or you have no knowledge about it. So once they are clear with the fact that you're strong in C++ or Java or any of the language that you choose, that will be enough. So I think you just need to take one language, master that language, and start practicing the language. However, if you have time, then you can try exploring other languages, but it is not mandatory or it is not very necessary to go through other languages. But you can have a knowledge about other languages, but master just one language, because that will also help you, because else you'll be wandering in different languages. Okay, now coming to the next topic, that will be DBMS. So DBMS is a very important aspect because the entire data that will be storing would be in the database. So databases are very important in general. So now in my Deloitte interview, my questions were mainly based on DBMS. Why? Because they were asking the questions regarding, they asked me questions about basic queries. Now, what exactly are basic queries? They are creating table, inserting data into table, and retrieving data from the table. These are some of the few basic things that they'll ask you. They'll not ask you much complicated questions. They'll just ask you basic queries. Now let us go through. I will not be explaining all the topics in this, but these are few of the topics that is required for you to go through, because majority of the interview questions are likely to be based on this topic. One second. Majority of the questions are likely to be based on these topics, and once you have mastered these topics, then you can, if you have time, then you can go and explain. And I won't be explaining all the topics, but I'll also be dropping a link to where you can refer, or how you can prepare for each of these topics. I'll drop a link for almost all the topics that I'm covering. For example, DBMS, SC, and then C and OS, all the topics. I'll just drop a link so that it will be helpful for you to just refer them whenever you can. And moving to the first one. So now, what exactly are the different types of languages? So coming to the database, SQL. So there are interface. What exactly does, we need to have a proper information for what exactly are the database languages. So database languages are mainly used for what? For reading, storing, updating table. These are the basic requirement. These are the basic uses of database languages. Now, first language, that is the DDL, is data definition language. Now, why is data definition? Now, interview questions won't be based on like your OU papers, like list down the different types of data definition languages. They are going to ask you what are the commands that come under data definition language. Now, if you know the definition of data definition language, for example, why is it used? It is used to create tables. It is used to create the skeleton of the database. That is the reason why we use DDL languages. So now, immediately, you'll be able to answer the fact that the commands that come under data definition language would be create, alter, drop, truncate. So these are the different types of commands that come. Similarly, they can also ask you what are the different commands that come under data manipulation language, data control language, transmission control language. So you are just expected to answer the fact that manipulate. If you for that you do not have to memorize these statements. If you just know what definition is for defining the table, manipulation, what is manipulation used for? It is for accessing and manipulating data in a database. Now, how do you do it? We use it doing select commands, insert commands, update commands, delete commands. So these are the different yeah. Similarly, if you understand the control language. Now, what are controlling language used for? It is used for retrieving the stored or saved data. You're basically controlling the entire database. You're trying to retrieve the data that is stored or the saved data. So what are the different commands that you can use? You can use the grant command, you can use the revoke command. These are different commands that will be exchanged. Similarly, the last one will be the transaction control language. So what is the TCL used? What are the TCL used for? So it is used for committing and it is used for rollback. So basically, whatever the commands that you apply, so you need to commit everything that you do on database. And if you want to undo something, so that is when you use the rollback command. So this is how these are the questions that is to be accepted or expected on the one second. These are the questions that will be expected on the different types of languages. Now, coming to the asset properties, if you have just a brief, good knowledge about what exactly asset properties stand for and what are these important, I think you'll be good to do. And then one of the key or the most important questions will be the delete versus drop versus truncate. Because since these sound similar and these to an extent have a similar functionality, we are bound to get confused about what exactly delete is, what exactly truncate is, what exactly these things are. So that is the reason why it is very important that you clearly know the difference between what is delete, what is truncate, what is delete, truncate, and drop. So now coming to the delete command. So what exactly is a delete command? As the name suggests, it is used to delete one or more tuples of a table. Now, with the help of delete command, we can directly, now you're wishing to delete a particular row. You can use the delete command and specify your condition in the where clause. But if if you're planning to delete the entire row, you can directly use the delete from command, and the entire rows of the table will get deleted. Now, what is one of the important characteristic of a delete command? Whatever we delete, we can get it back. So basically, this is like when we are deleting a thing from our delete is nothing but when we are just directly deleting it from the computer, it goes into the recycle bin, and from recycle bin we can get it back. That is the function of delete basically. So you can get a rollback function as well. Now coming to drop, but delete in general, this is one important point to remember from interview perspective, that delete in general is slow when compared to truncate. So they might ask you that why do we prefer delete, why do we prefer truncate? So just remember that delete is comparatively slow when compared to truncate. Now moving to the next one, that is a drop thing. Now what exactly is drop? So drop, now if you are planning to delete the entire table, so you cannot go about deleting the entire rows and then deleting the entire columns and all. So that is the reason why we use a command that is called as drop command. So once we drop and the table, once we drop the table name, that's it. The entire table along with the schema, the table, the entire things that you have defined are going to get dropped. And once you have dropped, you're not once you have dropped the entire table, you won't be able to get it back. So rollback commands cannot be used. This is not like recycle bin that you are able to get the table back. Once you have dropped the table, that's it, it is gone. It's basically shift plus delete that you do in your computers, that it permanently deletes the files from your system. That is how the entire drop functionality functions. Now moving to the next one, the truncate one. Now what exactly is a truncate command? Now truncate command is similar to the delete command. Truncate command also deletes all the rows of a relation in one go. But what is the disadvantage of using a truncate command is that if you are planning to delete a single row, you cannot do that with truncate command. Why? Because there is no where clause that is present in the truncate command. So you cannot delete any single row using the truncate command. But however, now your goal is to delete all the rows. So I'll give you an example of an interview question that is likely to be asked on. Now if I am planning to delete all the rows in my table, which command would I use to have an efficient deletion of the rows? So now initially you would be like delete command, you'll be like delete command is better. But like I had mentioned, truncate is much faster when compared to delete. That is the reason why you should use truncate command. Now they might also ask you that if I want to delete rows, but I want my rows to come, I suddenly start expecting the rows to come back. Now I want to undo the operation that I have applied. So in this case, you cannot use truncate. Why? Because rollback cannot be used with truncate. So you should use the delete command. Why? Because even though delete is slower, but we have the rollback options. So if a person is looking for undo option, then he has to use delete. But if he just wants to delete the rows with the efficiency, then he has to use the truncate command. And again, I just want everyone to know that if I am speaking a bit fast, or if you feel that I'm going a bit fast, then please do mention it out in the chat box so that I just get to know that I should be speaking a bit slow. One second. Give me 1 second. Yep. Yeah. So this is regarding the delete versus drop versus truncate. So I've given you the examples of how questions would be faced on delete, drop, and truncate. Now coming to normalization. So this is a very important topic. I am very sure that you are bound to have questions on normalization. Like normalization is a topic that is the most important topic in DBMS. So I'm sure that they're going to ask you questions on normalization. So, and it is also a pretty lengthy, it is also a pretty complex topic. So I will also share different sites. You have different platforms from where you can get to know about normalization. For example, they are Geeks from Geeks, but I'll also share a slide. Second, yeah. So where you can actually go through the entire normalization. Yeah, sure, Zeba. I'll just slow down a bit on that. Yeah. So you are required to first understand why normalization is required. So what is the goal of normalization? So your interviewer might ask you, what would you do if there's data redundancy in your database? So you would apply normalizations. So they are not going to ask you all the types of normalizations, but it is important for you to just remember first, second, third, and the BCNF. BCNF is basically a combination of all the three. So basically, it is very important that you remember first normal form, second normal form, and third normal form. These are the key or the basic ones that you're required to remember. Once you're clear with these three normal forms, I think you're good to go with the other normal form there. But usually fourth and fifth are not asked in the interviews. Only the first, second, third, and the boys BCNF are asked. Now coming to what exactly is first. Now what exactly is the condition of first normal form? So the condition of first normal form would be you are not expected to have repeated rows. For example, repeated data or multiple data. In this table, if you see, there's black, there's red, there's green, there's blue. This is multiple data. So what is the key point of first normal form? That eliminating repeating groups in individual tables. Now, if you see this table, this is not in first normal form. Why? Because the column color contains multiple values. So that is the reason why this is not in first normal form. Now they might ask you to give you to state an example about what exactly is a first normal form, or they might also ask you to they might also give you a table in general and ask you to just break it down into the first normal form. So what you just have to do in this case is split these values. Like if I go on to the next slide, you can just see that you have product ID, you have price, you are just splitting it into basically different two different rows. So now as you can see, there's no multiple values in any of the columns, and now we can conclude the fact that this is in first normal form. Usually, the questions that are based on normalizations would be asked you mostly in your written tests. Why? Because written tests, they'll give you an MCQ option, they'll give you a table, they'll give you a scenario, and then you are asked to predict whether which normal form is the following question is in, the table is in. For example, I can just give you this random table, and then I can ask you which normal form does this table not satisfy, and the options would be first, second, third, and BCNF. Now once you're clear with the concept, you would be able to realize that since these are having multiple values, the only normal form that does not satisfy would be the first normal form. So basically, usually these questions are asked in your written rounds and not mostly in the interview rounds. And moving on to the second. Yeah. So I'll just yeah, 1 second. Yeah. Yeah. So since it's been almost 40 minutes, so I think we'll just take a 5 minute break, and then we'll get back, and then we'll start with the second. We'll start with the rest of the normal forms, and then I can quickly give you the idea about what the project. So please attend the session of the break as well, because I'll be telling you about what projects you are required to make, and how many projects are enough, what are the things that you're supposed to focus on. So I'll be mentioning those, and I'll also be giving you an overview about the OS and CN as well. So please do join back in like 5 minutes. So we'll resume exactly from 7:52 or 7:53. We'll resume back. Oh, yeah. Okay. So now I actually know what our lecturers go through while addressing students. Yeah. So I'm hoping all of you are back now and we can resume and we can continue with our session. So if there's any disturbance in the audio or if you find any if my voice is not audible, then please do paste it in the chat so that I can immediately stop and then I can address the issue. Now, moving on to what exactly the second normal form is. So, just remember one thing that every consecutive first normal form, the second normal form is required to be in first normal form. Similarly, the third normal form is required to be in first and second normal form, and similarly, a BCNF is required to be in one, two, three. So you have to remember this for the fact that second should contain first, third should contain first and second, and BCNF should contain 1, 2, and 3. So the first condition is that thing, and the next one is no non-prime attribute is dependent on the proper subset of any candidate key. So if you have a knowledge about candidate, it should be the non-prime attribute should not be a subset of the candidate keys. Like if you know about different types of keys, there are primary key, foreign key, candidate key. So it requires that the non-prime attribute should not be dependent upon the proper subset of this thing. So in this example, if you see, there's a composite primary key over here. What is the composite primary key over here? That is the customer ID and the store ID, and the non-key attribute is the location. So over here, the location depends upon the store ID, which is a part of the primary key, because since this is a primary key, the location is bound to depend upon here. If you see one, here's Patna, one and the next one is here, one is Paris. That is the reason why they are dependent upon this thing. So that is how that is why it is basically not in the second normal form. And then you're again asked to decompose into the second normal form and then divide it over here. That we have to create two different tables over here. That is, one is the table store, one is the table purchase. So this is also most likely to come into, this is also, they won't be asking you to actually decompose over here. They'll probably just give you they'll probably give you the question regarding whether the table is in second normal form or not, whether it satisfies second normal form or not, and similarly. The next one is in the first condition, third normal form. The first condition that it is here is table must be in second NF. Now you must be wondering that I had specified the fact that the third normal form must be in first normal form, must satisfy first normal form as well, and second for normal form as well. But if you remember, the second normal form already satisfies the first normal form. So automatically, when third normal form satisfies the second normal form, it is automatically satisfying the first normal form as well. And then comes the transitive functional dependency of any super key should be removed. So there should not be any transitive functional dependency. For example, any functional key must not be dependent on any of the other attributes. For example, let's go to the example over here. In this table, if you see, there are different rows. For example, there is blood book ID, and then there's genre type, and then there's price. And so therefore here book ID determines whether the genre type we have so therefore in this case the book ID is having a transitive functional dependency over here. So thus this entire table is not in third normal form, and again in order to satisfy this we have to decompose it. And coming to the Bcnf, so Bcnf generally considers the fact that it must be satisfying all the three normal forms, and it is also called as 3.5 NF. So in case you get a question about what is the other name, that you probably won't be, but in case you get a question about what exactly is a voice code normal form, then you can also specify it is also referred to as 3.5 NF. So this is regarding the entire Dbms normalization techniques. So this is one of the most important topics, and don't worry, I'll be giving the links, and I'll also be posting a few videos on YouTube that you can go through, because that you can go through in order to understand the entire concept in detail for the normalization. Now coming to now coming to the keys. So there are a lot of keys. So therefore there are 8 different types of keys in Dbms. That is nothing but super key, primary key, candidate key, alternate key, foreign key, composite key, surrogate key, and compound key. But the most important keys out of these are nothing but the primary key. Now what is a primary key? Consider an example, your roll number. Your roll number is the primary key. Why? Because no other student in the entire college will be having the same roll number as you. So it is just a unique identity for it is a unique identity for every row in a table. So primary key is one of the most important keys that is to be remembered. Then is a foreign key. Now, what is the foreign key? Foreign key is basically for having a relationship between two tables. So it makes it very easy for navigation between two tables. Now consider a teacher. Now consider a teacher and a teacher table and a student and a department table. Now there is no relation between these two tables. But however, if we add a row called department code in both the tables, now this will act as a foreign key. This will help in understanding the fact that this department code can be used to form a relationship between the teacher table and the department table. That is how the foreign key works. The next one is the candidate key. So candidate key is it helps in identifying tuples in a table. So basically, candidate key is a super key with no repeated addendum. Now, coming to what exactly a super key is nothing but a group of single or multiple keys which identifies a row in a particular table. Now, you can have a single key that is identifying a table, or you can have a mixture of two keys which helps in identifying the rows in a table. So that is the different types of keys that are important to remember. So now, in case you are noting it down, or if you are planning to note it down, then just remember that super key, candidate key, foreign key, primary key. These are the four different important keys that you are required to know, and mostly the questions would be based on these keys as well. And the last topic of DBMS would be one second. Would be basic queries. Now, what exactly are basic queries? So these are, for example, you are facing an interview. The interviewer will just give you a simple query. Insert this information into a table. So what are you required to know in this? You do not have to write the entire. You do not have to know the entire code down, but you just have to know syntax. Once you know the syntax of anything, you'll be good to go. You can directly write the query, like for example, insert into table. You can directly write the syntax over there. Similarly, they can ask you to retrieve data from a table. They can ask you simple clauses. For example, where ask you to retrieve information from a department table. Ask you to retrieve information from a department table where the department code is 10 or 20 or something, whatever they want. So these are the basic queries that they'll ask you in most of your interviews. And for in my case, I was asked about the DBMS questions even in the HR round as well, because since our managers, the HR round will be mostly taken by the managers, right? So they are also well equipped with the technical knowledge, and they won't only be asking you about the situational questions. Just they might also ask you about technical knowledge as well. They'll ask you about how many types of normalizations are there. What do you know about asset properties? Just help me retrieve this row from this particular table. So that is, you can expect any type of questions in HR round as well. It is not necessary or mandatory that HR will only ask you about situational questions like where do you see yourself in 5 years, or why do we hire you. It is not necessary that HR will ask you only these questions. Now, okay, so there's a question about the fact that was the package different for different roles in ServiceNow? Initially, the package differences will not be much. It will only be 1 or 2 lakh differences. But I'm not sure about the future scope. But initially, for internship, the packages were same for all of us. And for the full-time employment, also the packages will differ by just 1 or 2 lakhs. There will not be much difference between the various roles. So I hope that answers your question. And the next one would be, now, so operating systems and CN. So these are two topics that I am not going to explain in detail. Why? Because this is a completely theoretical subject, and this is a very vast subject to read from. So, and you do not need to know much in depth, because these questions are, I have had these questions in 1 or 2 writing in my interviews. There were not much questions on operating systems and computer networks, but majority of the questions were based on the rest of the topics that I explained you. In operating systems, types of topics that you might expect are they might ask you only in the written tests. Now, what they'll ask you about what exactly semaphores are. So you're required to know the basic information about what exactly deadlocks are. Once you know about what deadlocks is and how a process goes into a deadlock and where it is not able to get out of deadlock, then you also have to know about the deadlock prevention techniques. So this is one important question that they might ask you in your personal interviews. Like, suppose which deadlock technique would you choose? So these are the few things that operating systems that might come from operating systems. Now, moving on to computer networks and operating systems, they both of them are theoretical subjects, and I would recommend you like do not do not go through studying it from 6 months or something. Like if you have your interview scheduled next week, so if you start reading up things a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before, and because these are things that you have to remember. You cannot forget these things. You just have to memorize these things because you have to remember the TCP structure. You have to remember the UDP structure. There are various public key cryptography schemes. There are various private key cryptographic schemes. So these are things that you are bound to remember. So if you just start learning, reading them or memorizing them a week or 2 weeks before your exam, I think that will be good. So if you are planning for a preparation for an interview schedule, so for my schedule, I would say that I had first initially focused on competitive programming. Then while I had focused on competitive programming, then I simultaneously I started reading about software engineering since it was related to my role. And then obviously the DBMS and various data structures that we'll be having in the future classes. But OS and CN were the things that I started preparing a week prior to my interview, and those are two things that you can just go through them once and you can just learn them once because there are not chances of much questions that are coming from OS and CN. However, this was in the case of my interview. You might have questions from OS and CN. I'm not denying the fact that you are not going to have any questions. So you might have questions. So I'll just share this slide as well so that all of you can just make sure that you, if not the entire OS or CN, you can go through these important topics because these are just very short topics that you can go through once. And next one would be the projects. Next one would be the projects. Yep. Coming to the most important part, that is the projects. Now, what are the things that are going to help you build your resume? First would be your skills. What skills do you possess? Now, if I could say that I have good skills in Java, I have good skills in C++, but how are you expected to? How are you going to believe what skills I have? So that is nothing but your demonstration of your skills would be your projects. So you do not have to make a lot of 15, 20, hundreds of projects. You can make proper 3 projects or 4 projects or 5 projects, but you must have a strong grip on what you are making. You cannot. Most of the people just go and copy the code, but you can mention it in your resume as well as. However, the interviewer is not going to find out. But when he starts questioning you on your projects, that's when you get caught. The interviewer is very experienced. He's going to find it out in like legit 2 or 3 minutes about the fact that this project you have not developed it from the scratch. You have not done anything. You have just copied the code from the internet. That is pretty much it. So that is the reason why you have to now what various aspects can you make projects on. So if you're interested in web development, make a complete full stack website. So the full stack website will not only help you show your skills, but it will also enhance your skills. When you read something and when you're learning something, unless you implement it, you're not going to have a good grip on it. This I have learned from my personal experience. I had not made many projects. I had made only around 2 or 3 projects. That is when I had realized the fact that how important projects were. So if I would have made more projects, then I would have added more of them into my resume, which would have added more weight to my resume. So that is the reason why start working on projects. I am not asking you to invest your entire day in the project, but at least you can spend 3 hours a day on your project, 3 hours a day, and start writing down a bit of code for everything that you're learning. Whenever you learn everything, start looking for its application. You're looking for example, if you're learning about data structure, for example, if you're learning about linked list stack, you start learning where are they used in real life, because unless you understand the real application of everything that you learn, then you'll not be able to understand the concept at all. If you start implementing it, then you learn. For example, if you just go reading through javascript, you learn javascript, you learn react, you learn angular, you'll just have the theoretical knowledge. But when you start building a website, there are different challenges that you'll face. There's how to integrate various things, how to build the front end, what are the different libraries that you require, what are the various things. And the best thing for projects is start googling. And the most important tool that you have in your hand is googling. So you whatever you have, any doubt you have, you can go to Google. You can start searching on Google, and any query, any code snippet, you'll get code snippets on Google as well. And then you can alter it according to you can alter it according to your wish as well. So that is how you start building projects. And I would recommend